think we should get started. Good
Leo,
morning, good evening, ladies, wherever you are around the globe. Welcome to
Leo,
this important topical discussion where we will be discussing the role of South Sudanese women in the constitution making process. First of all, I would like to thank you for joining us today. Today, we'll be talking about the role of South Sudanese women in the constitution making process. We have with us today Honorable Voska Martin Enoka, Ms. Julia Akur, Ms. Norna Merekeja, Ms. Jacqueline Nasiwa, and Ms. Margaret Mathiang. But before we start, I would also like to congratulate the East African community for having trust in us as South Sudanese women by awarding our lady, our strong iron woman, Ms. Aisha, an award of the East African Community 2021. Ms. Aisha, you have made us very proud. Thanks for the good job you have done and you are still doing. Keep inspiring us. We were so proud and we're still proud. And then you really deserve it for the good work you have been doing. Thank you very much, Ms. Aisha. As I told you earlier, today's discussion is going to be about South Sudanese women in the constitutional making. We all know that constitution making includes both the process for making a new constitution or amending an existing or an old constitution, as well as the decision about the design and the form and content of the new or amended constitution. Comparative experience demonstrates a range of process to draft and adopt a new constitution. And in a developing constitution making process, it is important for the main groups involved to reach an agreement on a set of principles intended to guide the process. These are often referred as guiding principles, and sometimes as constitutional principles, or in few cases, immutable principles. Such principles can be addressed both how the process is going to be conducted. For example, requiring that it should be consultative and participatory, and the content of the constitution that it's expected will result. Guiding principles tend to reflect key aspects to the historical context in which the particular process is taking place, and also the broader international norms, standards, and precedents. I'm talking as a lawyer. I understand some of us are not lawyers, but this is what we are going to discuss today. Women's presence in the negotiating table, whether of peace agreements or constitution, has been low throughout history, especially our history here in South Sudan. Yet women are equally affected by conflict and oftentimes end up playing non-traditional roles during war, such as head of household or component. The Constitution is a key to a nation, as it is a foundation in which it stands. The process needs to reflect everyone's view, and women's view are critical. South Sudan, since PPA is struggling having a permanent constitution, the process was started through the NCRS, National Constitution Review, but due to the 2013 conflict, things came to stand still. The RACRSS gives opportunity to continue with the process of adopting a permanent constitution for South Sudan state. My name is Stella KG Stephen, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. For those ones who don't know me, I'm a lawyer by profession, and I'm working for an organization, a national organization, as a senior legal officer. Before we go into our sessions, I would like briefly to introduce our great panelists, our strong, independent South Sudanese women. Honorable Voska Martin, I'll start with Honorable Voska Martin Enoka. Honorable Voska Martin Enoka is a member of the South Sudan National Legislative Assembly. Honorable Voska has a diploma in Sustainable Agriculture and Rural Development from Molo Agricultural College. Honorable has worked with so many organizations in the past, such as NPA, UNICEF, ADRA, etc. In the year 2005, Honorable Voska was appointed to the State Legislative Assembly in Western Equatorial State, in 2010. She was elected to the South Sudan National Legislative Assembly as well. In 2012, Honorable Voska was appointed as the deputy chairperson of water and irrigation in the South Sudan National Legislative Assembly. Honorable Voska, you are most welcome for today's discussion. Our second guest of today's discussion is Ms. Lorna Merekaje. Ms. Lorna Merekaje is a graduate from the University of Nairobi, though trained as a biomedical technologist. She has developed a career both as a biomedical technologist and a civil political rights activist. Currently, she serves as the Secretary General of South Sudan Democratic Engagement, Monitoring and Observation Program, an organization that played a significant role in monitoring and observation of 2010 Sudan general election and the 2011 Southern Sudan referendum for self-determination. She's a member of global networks of high achievers, such as the United Nations Department-sponsored International Vista Leadership Program and the Fairuz and Najma Lalja Foundation and London School of Economics sponsored program for African leadership. Ms. Lorna has been awarded the prestigious Franco-German Award for Human Rights Defenders for her exemplary work as a human rights defender in the country where a civic space continues to shrink. Ms. Lorna Merekaje, you are most highly welcome with us for our today's discussion. The third panelist who is going to be with us also, Ms. Jacqueline Nasiwa. Ms. Jacqueline Nasiwa holds a Bachelor of Law from Makerere University and a Master in International Law from Oxford Brookes University in International Law and International Human Rights. Ms. Nasiwa has a passion for promoting gender inclusion and protection of women's rights and rights of children, and strong advocate of peace, transitional justice, and good governance. She has a strong international personal skills, leadership, communication skills. Ms. Nasiwa is an experienced international lawyer, rule of law specialist, and peace building expert based in Juba, South Sudan. Ms. Nasiwa worked with the National Democratic Institute as a senior manager on constitutional development. She also has experience with the South Sudan Referendum Bureau, the International Development Law Organization, and the United Nations Development Program. In October 2017, Ms. Jacqueline established a non-governmental organization in South Sudan, the Center for Inclusion, Governance, Peace and Justice, that works for gender inclusion, peace building, reconciliation, access to justice, and good governance. She is also a chairperson of the board of South Sudan National Alliance of Women Lawyers. Ms. Jacqueline has passion for women's leadership in South Sudan and strives towards a society that values human dignity, women's empowerment for development, and funded on justice and rule of law. Our fourth panelist is Ms. Margaret Mathiang. The biography of Ms. Margaret Mathiang reads as follows: is a social and development professional with over 15 years experience in various areas of expertise, gained from working with the civil society, governmental and non-governmental organizations, and the United Nations in both Kenya and South Sudan. She is a holder of master's degree in development and education from the University of Wolverhampton in the United Kingdom and has a bachelor degree in community development from Daystar University in Kenya. Ms. Margaret served as Deputy Chairperson of South Sudan Mine Action Authority, Undersecretary for the Ministry of Gender, Child and Social Welfare, and a member of the National Constitutional Review Commission. Margaret worked with the Global Fund Program of UNDP and as well across, and also worked for the Catholic Relief Service, CRS, which is known as CRS, as a gender advisor for the Reconciliation Peace Project, and is currently serves as gender analyst with the United Nations Development, known as UNDP in South Sudan. Ms. Margaret Mathiang, you are highly welcome for our today's discussion. The fifth panelist who is going also to be with us is Ms. Julia Akur. Ms. Julia, accept my apologies. We did not receive your biography as I've been waiting for it to be sent, but I did not receive it.
Sorry for that.
All right. So without wasting much time, I'll come back to you, Ms. Voska Martin, with my first question. Are you ready for the question, Ms. Voska, Honorable Voska? Honorable Voska?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right.
Yeah.
Your first question goes as this. The National Legislature plays a critical role in the adoption of the Constitution. Can you please describe to the listeners your role as an MP?
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ms. Margaret, Ms. Stella KG, for the elaborate lecture that you have done. Thank you very much. I will go direct to the question. In fact, as an MP in the Parliament, our first work is to oversight. What are we oversighting? We are looking to the bills that comes to the Parliament. We oversight the bills that the executive brings, and that is our most work that we do in the Parliament, to oversight, to see what are the bills, explain to the citizens what these bills means. There are bills that are brought that may hinder the society. It's your work is to oversee those bills which are written and then be brought. Which laws really pertain the issues of women? Let me talk of example of the bill that explains how the budget is allocated to health. What is the budget allocated to agriculture? What is the budget allocated to education? This is where women mostly oversee the budgets which are allocated for each year which comes to the Parliament. Our role an MP in the Parliament is to oversee. You can also be delegated by the Speaker to also do other work. But our roles is to pass the legislations that comes from the executives after scrutiny, that bills, and then we pass. We made that legislations, and then we pass it. Before passing, they sent to the committees. There are committees in the Parliament which these are partners. We work with them together, all the ministries. Once a bill is introduced, is tabled to the Parliament, your role as an MP is to oversee what is in that bill. What are the critical things that you want to put in that bill, and which are the things that we need to take out if it harms the citizen or the society of your nation? And that's the main role of being a parliamentary women in the Parliament. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Voska, Honorable Voska. Coming back to you, Ms. Julia Akur. As a woman lawyer, what role did you and your organization play in the constitutional review process?
Thank you for the question. As an individual, I've had the opportunity to participate in the constitutional review process in different ways. I was a member of the Southern Sudan Interim Drafting Constitutional Committee that drafted the 2005 interim constitution. At the time, I was the youngest member of the committee, and it was one of my brightest moments as a young lawyer and Southern Sudanese. Having a place at the drafting table where the liberation ideals and the vision of a new Sudan was very much alive amongst the drafters, and where I could sit with older and more seasoned lawyers who are willing to take into account the views of the younger lawyers, such as myself at the time, and pass on their skills and experience, was an experience that I cherish to date. At the time, I had been working with the Secretariat of Legal Affairs on a child law reform project to draft a child bill for Southern Sudan that was sponsored by UNICEF OLS. which I later on went to work with. A specific task I was assigned by the drafting committee was to share some of the reform proposals that had been coming out from consultations on the draft child bill. I was given an opportunity by the Constitutional Drafting Committee to make a presentation not only on the reform proposals, but also the international legal framework governing children's rights, from which the drafting committee jointly agreed on and crafted constitutional provisions to best protect and promote the rights of children in Southern Sudan. Some of the provisions we drafted, including the right of children to be free from all forms of abuse and exploitation, child labor, protection from corporal punishment, the right to be free from harmful and negative traditional and customary practices, as well as enshrining the principles of non-discrimination and the best interests of the child. With the transitional constitutional review process that took place, that led to the transitional constitution of 2011, I played a more secretariat role as a legal counsel then in the Ministry of Justice to assist with the convening of a meeting of state legislators to develop a model transitional constitution for the state legislative assemblies to guide them in the development of their own individual state national constitutions that were in conformity with the international with the transitional constitution. In terms of the Federation of Women Lawyers of South Sudan, or FIDA South Sudan, some of the roles the organization has played include forging alliances with other women's organizations and initiating a process to convene a constitutional workshop with women from the states to make reform proposals to ensuring the rights of women are protected in the Constitution. A key outcome of that workshop was a manifesto containing key proposals by women. Another role is that we work together with other women's groups, notably the Women's Association and SWEN, on civic education around the Constitution so that women could make informed proposals. And to this end, we developed a women's guide to the transitional constitution, as well as a one-page policy document with key policy reform recommendations. We also participated in radio and TV discussions during this period to create awareness. We held advocacy and lobbying meetings with the National Constitutional Review Commission at the time, as well as forged alliances with the Women's Parliamentary Caucus. FIDA developed a policy brief containing a 7-point agenda for strengthening gender equality in the permanent constitution. And even today, we feel the document we developed back then is still relevant for today and for future permanent constitution process. FIDA was part of a study tour to Ghana that had been organized by the Law Society to go and learn about constitutional review processes in other countries, the challenges and best practices, and effective strategies for citizens' public participation, which we then came and applied in our own process. FIDA also assisted in the convening of a workshop on gender-sensitive legislative drafting for women legislators, members of the National Constitutional Review Commission, and women lawyers that was facilitated by a renowned expert in the region on legislative drafting and funded by NPA.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Maulana Akur, for the good job you and your organization has been doing. We have to appreciate it. Ms. Lona, your question is, as a civil society organization leader with experience in the South Sudan constitutional making process, what are some of your experiences with the NCRC and NCAC processes as a woman and a civil society organization? What opportunity does this process give women? Ms. Lona, can you please unmute your microphone? Lona Marekeje, can you please unmute? Yes, Ms. Lona. All right, I think we are having some problems with our network. I'll be moving straight away to Ms. Jacqueline Nasiwa. Ms. Jacqueline, what is a constitution? Can you please define for us a constitution?
Thank you very much. And thank you to the panelists and the listeners outside there. Discussing a constitution, I think, is one of the key themes that the Women's Intellectual Forums have taken, and I'm so happy to be joining the panelists today. A constitution is defined as a framework for governance, and it's the framework that defines how a government is formed and it also describes how people can be appointed to take up positions of government. A constitution establishes the limits of the powers that can be given to different structures and to different leaders in a government. And in summary, I could say that a constitution is one of the fundamental and supreme law of the land. And in most cases, you find that a constitution becomes what defines a nation. And all other laws will be derived from the constitution. So be it the state laws, be it other national legislations and the rest, they are all to be consistent with the national constitution. And therefore the constitution becomes the fundamental or the foundation on which a nation can be built. It defines the powers that each of the governance structures may have, each of the leaders may have. It also defines the system of governance that can be taken. And a constitution becomes now the mother of the laws of a country. And therefore, all laws derive from the constitution. Some countries define the constitution as the mirror through which the people of a nation can see themselves. So like when you look at a mirror, you can see exactly how you look like, but also the constitution is like the mirror of the nation. What the constitution says is what the nation is. And for example, in our case, our constitution will define what system of government we are, what type of structures do we have, and what are the principles and values that we uphold. Therefore, the constitution becomes a special kind of an agreement between the people and the state, and also it spells out what the state is to do on behalf of the people, and it is what uphold and bind the people together. Therefore, I could say that our transitional constitution, for example, is starting with a preamble that says, we the people. Therefore, it puts the people first, and then other things will come in. And therefore, as in summary, I could say a constitution is that set of law that is the foundation of a nation. It's the law that other laws and policies derive from, and it's the one that binds the people together. And therefore, it becomes the mirror of the nation. Thank you.
Coming back to you, Ms. Margaret Mathiang, your question reads as this. What were the experience of women among the key commissioners of the NCRC? Kindly share with us the experience of women in the process.
Thank you very much, Stella, and greetings to my other panelists. I want to start by appreciating the South Sudanese Women Intellectual Forum for giving me this opportunity to participate in this important discussion and share ideas and experiences on the participation of women in the process. Before I go on answering my question, I just want to add that a constitution is a source of life. It is central to the way that we live. It regulates our affairs, and that's why women must be part of the dialogue that takes place to ensure that their aspiration, their needs, and their rights are reflected in the current and the future arrangements of the country. Sharing the experiences of women in the process, I'd like to say that when the commission was established through a presidential order, the members were around, the female commissioners were about 15. This is underrepresentation, 15 out of 50 something. So to me, that was like an underrepresentation of women in the commission. And want to also mention that when they participate, they did not participate only as women, but they participate as active citizens of the country who have something to offer to this process. So I would like to mention that the female commissioners were active members of the commission, and they participated fully in the plenaries, and they brought out the strong voices to ensure that the Constitution clause protects women from discriminatory legal measures in key issues such as, for example, the issues of land, property, land ownership, education, healthcare, work, issues of family law. The members discuss a lot on the issues of like the marriageable age, which is not mentioned clearly in the Constitution, and other things. And also equal participation of women in decision making. Some of the strong voices, since this is an honest sharing of experiences, I would like to mention that some of the strong voices that still lingers in my mind in that process is that of late Mama Helen Oler. We also have had Mama Rosa Wet, who played a big role in bridging divides and advancing consensus. For example, during heated debates, you will see them coming in, putting on their mature hats, and they cool the emotions, as well as using the opportunity to deliver strong points. I also remember the consistent voices of, and thank God she's also here with us, Lorna Merikaji, Honorable Mary Agol, Dudu Sepit, Honorable Beatrice Aber, Honorable Nunu Jemakumba, and others who are debating passionately, not only on gender issues, but also on other giant issues. For example, the security. We also had a lot of debates on issues of presidential terms and also on boundaries. I also want to mention that the women in the process, they participated in lobbying for inclusion of more women in the process, together with the civil society. Although there were some situations where some, let me say, complaints were raised by some civil society that maybe in the process or the appointed people, there were also some relatives. But I would like to state that when people are appointed according to their portfolios. And as women, we should be aware of something like that. Also, women participated in civic education subcommittees, and they traveled to the different areas by air, by road, despite the difficulties and the dangers in some locations. So women commissioners were not left out in also experiential learning visits to places like Kenya, to South Africa, and where they aired also their views openly in the media when delegated. I also want to mention that during breaks or when people are relaxed, women used to sit and strategize on how to address issues of concern and delegate members to raise issues based on their expertise. Because sometimes there can be a very strong issue that can be raised by a certain individual because that's her area of strength. So that one was very important fact. Then female commissioners also held follow-up meetings with NCRC leadership and partners, such as UN Women. UN Women was so much interested in supporting the process, especially the gender mainstreaming aspect in the commission. Some planned activities included, for example, conduct of capacity needs assessment of the commission to ascertain the various capacities needs in relation to gender equality and women's rights. Also, they were having plans like to conduct capacity building trainings to members of the commission and other civil society members on gender and rights of women, and support the commission to design and conduct a sensitization workshop for constitutional drafting process and on gender sensitive constitutions. I also want to mention that women in the process were part of other initiatives. They were not only part of the being commissioners or being part of the commission, they were part of other initiatives in the region and also within the country. I forgot to mention earlier that when they were selected from different groups. There were women from civil societies, from political parties, from faith-based organizations, even from the private sector. And so citizen participation in constitutional making and reflecting now on the women participation is a key democratic component to state stability, and people's driven constitution is a primary component of a stable state. And that's why the voices of women were very important in the process. Thank you. Over to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ms. Margaret Mathiang, for answering the first question and then for clarifying the commissioners, the role of the NCRC, and the experience of women in the NCRC Commission. Before I move to the second question, allow me just to take less than 2 minutes to read Ms. Akur's biography. I've just received it now in my email. So Ms. Julia Akur is a South Sudanese women lawyer with an undergraduate degree in law and a master's degree in international development law. She has participated in the past constitutional and law reform processes and worked for the Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Petroleum, and UN agencies such as UNICEF. She is a founding member of the Federation of Women Lawyers of South Sudan. This is shortly about Ms. Julia Akur, who is a member of South Sudan Women Intellectual. So now moving to the second question. And going back to you, Ms. Voska. Your second question reads as follows. What is the process for amending and adopting the Constitution?
Thank you very much, the moderator and the listeners. Yeah, in an event that the Constitution needs to be amended, first of all, we look at what are the things that is missing in the Constitution or which need to be added. Then, first of all, the Constitution is drafted by the experienced people who normally draft, and it comes from the executive. Then it is tabled to the parliament. After tabling it to the parliament, now the committees, the committee of legislation and other committees now will join in. It's where the scrutiny takes place. By amending, either the Constitution has missed something that they want to include. Like, for example, when we are talking about amending the Constitution, we want to put on like the laws, their act, that was not consistent with our situation in South Sudan after the secession. We have looked at the issue of the reforms of the security bill, in which we came in to see that the security bill which were used in Sudan was not aiming up with our situation in South Sudan, because it has a lot of problems that when you are arrested, suppose you did something wrong, and then you are arrested, you will also be arrested with your family, and all your possessions will be confiscated. We looked at an issue in South Sudan that we need that article to be taken away. We then put now the Constitution to be taken back to be amended. There are so many reforms which need to be put in the Constitution during the agreement process. And then after it is brought, it is now passed or will be done. The day in which, especially you are passing the Constitution, it has to be passed by three-thirds majority in the parliament. And if that number, because the Constitution is the document, and it is the paper that makes the country, as said by one of our speaker, that is a mirror. If it is passed by one third, it is not the Constitution. The speaker must make sure that the three-thirds majority are inside the parliament and signed, and it's where the Constitution can be able to be passed by the 3/3 majority. It's normally, this is the process which is done. Second to it, when we are missing something in the constitution, like last time we're having an issue that was brought to the parliament, that we need the experts, like the lawyers, because not all the MPs in the parliament, they're experts on the constitution. The constitution is drafted by experts. The lawyers include the civil society, the citizens, the youth, the women. They have to look into that constitution, which presents the will of everybody in the country. After all drafting, then it is now tabled to the parliament. It's where the parliamentary now sits, the MP sits and look into the constitution to see which are the things which are needed for the country. And then now they pass by the 3rd majority, because it is an important document of a country. That is how the process is done really in the parliament. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable, for the clarification. So back to you, Ms. Julia Kur. As an experienced lawyer, what are the key areas of the Constitution that women should pay attention to so that their needs and priorities are met?
I would say that gender-based violence is one of the most persistent human rights violations that many women face. It is a violation of women's rights in and of itself, as well as results in the violation of many other rights. It cuts across class and age and affects almost every single woman and girl. Gender-based violence prevents women from realizing their full potential. It strips them of their dignity. It's discrimination and amounts to torture. It is simply cruel, inhuman, and degrading. As such, one of the areas of the Constitution that women ought to pay keen attention to is the Bill of Rights section. The Bill of Rights section of the Constitution presents women an opportunity to lobby and decide on what place international human rights instruments that have been ratified by the country, such as CEDAW, the Maputo Protocol, or the CRC, that are critical to the fight on ending discrimination and violence against women, will occupy in our legal system. Whether we will have a monist legal system where international human rights instruments ratified by the state become directly implementable and enforceable by our courts without a need for enactment of further legislation, or whether we end up with a dualist legal system where international human rights instruments ratified by the state need to first be given effect through other separate legislation. Women have told us again and again that, in fact, the private or the personal sphere is very political. The private space where women and children should feel safe, for many women, can instead turn into a space where their rights are violated. The Bill of Rights section of the Constitution accords women an opportunity to incorporate language that recognizes gender-based violence for what it is: discrimination and cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, and enshrine the right of women and girls to be free from all forms of gender-based violence, to their bodily autonomy, to equal dignity and rights, and to equality before the law. Further, I would say that the Bill of Rights section could accord women the opportunity to set the foundation for an equitable marriage and family law regime that protects girls from early and forced marriage, protects women's rights during the marriage, and even protects them in the unfortunate event of a dissolution of a marriage. Under the Bill of Rights section, the stage can be set for a matrimonial property regime that recognizes the important contribution of women's unpaid work in a household, including in the acquisition of property by the spouse, so that women are not left destitute in the event of divorce or separation. Additionally, Part 1 of the Constitution contains a section that spells out the sources of law and the hierarchy of the law. On the one hand, one of the key reasons why we went through a long civil war, that was then Africa's longest civil war, was the right of the Southern Sudanese to cultural identity and to be able to freely uphold their cultures and traditions. Consequently, in our Constitution, customary law has a prominent recognition under our Constitution and under our legal system. However, a number of harmful customary and traditional practices exist that undermine and violate the rights of women and girls. Too often, what we see playing out is a selective, narrow, fixed, made interpretation of culture and customary law. The reality is that customary law is not static, but is living and evolving. Women should look at this part, usually part 1 of the Constitution, with a goal to contributing to the discussion or the debate on the proper place and treatment of customary law within our legal system, and contest male narratives around customary law and traditions. I'd also say that Part 7 and 8 of the current Constitution deals with the judiciary and public attorneys and the legal profession as a whole. A constitution is not merely a legal document, and this has been stated by the other panelists, consisting of a set of rules or the grand norm, as many constitutional lawyers like to think of it. A constitution also provides an opportunity to consolidate peace, mend the social fabric. It's an opportunity to craft a new and shared vision for the country and to rebuild trust into institutions of governance. One of such institutions, and an important one, is the judiciary. Whenever people live together in any society, conflicts are bound to arise. These conflicts have to be resolved in a just, transparent, and equitable manner so as to avoid people taking up matters into their own hands, and for this, an independent judiciary is required. In South Sudan today, there is a dire need to develop a culture for the respect of the rule of law. There is no magic in rules written down on paper. The rules have to be enforced. What we have had in South Sudan for far too long is a constitution, unfortunately without any constitutionalism. Women need to be part of the conversation on rebuilding trust in our institutions of governance, designing the system of governance we want to see put in place, and in strengthening key institutions such as the judiciary and upholding its independence. Additionally, in the same vein, women should look at the provisions of the Constitution on the public attorney and participate in the debate to determine how do women envision the institution of public attorney and how can this institution be made more effective. Are women comfortable with the roles of public prosecution, advocate general, government advisor, all being lumped together under the same institution and under executive control? Or do women want to see greater independence for some of these institutions, for example, the prosecutions? Moving forward, rebuilding trust and public confidence and developing a culture of respect for the rule of law will be key in consolidating peace. And these are just a few examples. I believe what we should be looking at, the whole Constitution remains relevant for women and should be something that women strategize around and are empowered to participate in.
Ms. Lona Merikeje, hope you are connected now. I'm not seeing Ms. Lona. I don't know what the problem could be.
Just focus.
Yeah. Yeah, since Lona, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah, welcome, Lona, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, you have missed the first question, so I'm going to ask you the first question. Yes, as a civil society organization leader, what experience in the South Sudan constitutional making process? What are some of your experience with the NCRC and NCAC processes as a woman and civil society organization? What opportunity does this process give women?
Well, thank you very much. I'm sorry, my network was letting me down, or it's my gadget. But as a woman and as a civil society activist, one of the few things that I would say about my experience in those spaces is, one, that when you get into that space, you are definitely a minority from the end, be it as a woman or as a civil society activist. Number two is that when you enter into that space, the space is hostile. The hostility of the space is evident. Number three is that what I've learned is most of the statements that we make as civil society and as women groups we put out there, they rarely find their space, they rarely find their way into those spaces unless we have people planted in there to propel our statements or our voices in. Number 4 is I would want to highlight that when you get, you're always expected by the politicians, with due respect to Honorable Voska, you're always expected that you should be the last person to open your mouth, you should be the last person to make a comment, you should always be the last. And I think those are things that I can say as an experience that I have felt by being in that
Yes, Lorna. I think Lorna is having serious issues with her network. She's still struggling. But we can move on. We can still move on and move to the third question, to the second question. Back to you, Ms. Jacqueline. What does a constitution matter for a country and the people?
Come again?
Hello, Jacqueline.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes, please, as we missed Ms. Lorna again, so we are moving back to you. Okay. Why does a constitution matter?
Thank you, Stella. I think, as I said in the beginning, when I was defining what is a constitution plays an important role for a nation. And one of the importance of the constitution is that it helps a nation to define its governance structures. And as we have seen in our situation, we are still struggling to define the structure of governance in South Sudan. For example, we are still looking at the issues of states, the powers that could go to the states, the system of the governance, whether we take parliamentary or we take another system of governance, or federal or versus unitary type of governance. So a constitution is important because it can help us to define what system of governance we want, and citizens get to also get involved in defining how they want to be governed and how their country can be governed, including its affairs. A constitution also establishes the character of a government by defining the basic principles of which a society must conform to. So later on, I think in my set, we'll be looking at what are the principles for a good constitution. But I will say that in this case, a constitution is very important because it helps us to understand the principles that we can apply in a country. It also defines the vision of a country and its principles. For example, looking at what are the goals and what are the objectives and values or characters that defines how we make our decisions. I was just talking yesterday with some colleagues, and we were asking ourselves, like, look, the Americans, they have for God and my country, and other countries, they have their own ones that defines who they are. Others have like, you know, in God we trust for the Americans, and then Uganda maybe for God and my country. In Sudan, they use the word Allah. But for us in South Sudan, who are we and how do we define ourselves? And I think this comes handy when we have the constitution, because we can be able to define our core values and the characteristics that define us. And in our constitution, South Sudan is defined as multi-ethnic, multi-cultural, multilingual, and also multi-religions. So that is what defines us, and this has to come into the constitution. It also describes the organization of the government, as I said, and it regulates also, particularly the powers that each of the institution will hold, and the limitations that go to each of those powers, and the functions of each of the departments and institutions of government. It also goes further to define the fundamental freedoms that people can have. And I think Julia talked about the rights and rights of women and rights of citizens as enshrined in the Bill of Rights. So a constitution also goes further to define those rights. And then to a bigger extent also, the constitution is able to define the sovereignty of a state. And it defines what powers goes to who. And for example, the powers that goes to the president, the powers that goes to the local levels, to the powers of the parliament, and probably the powers of the judiciary. So all those powers could be spelled in the constitution. And that is very important because without defining the powers, and then there's likely to be a confusion. The Constitution also plays a big role in that it spells out how government is run. And I think it's important that we know how the government is run, when do we hold elections, and which positions are to be elected, and what are the roles of these elected positions. And I think this is important, and it has to come from the Constitution, and that's why the Constitution is important in spelling out those powers and defining their boundaries. Thank you.
Back to you, Ms. Margaret Mathiang. How are women able to influence decisions and ensure their voices mattered? Hope you got me.
Can you come again?
Yes. Yeah. How are women able to influence decisions? Hope you're getting me well.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. As I mentioned in...
have you had my question? But have you had the question?
Yeah, you said how were women able to influence the decisions?
Yeah, and ensure their voices mattered.
Yes. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier in when I was tackling the first question, women participated effectively in all the plenaries, and they did not participate just as women, but they participate as active members and also active citizens of South Sudan. So for them to emphasize on points, they used to have meetings and agreed on what are the issues that we are tackling as women, what are the issues of concern, the burning issues that we have. So during the plenaries, for example, if the opportunity, and of course, when people raise up their hands, sometimes they feel like they are not recognized, but they will insist that they need to say their points, and then the opportunity is given to them. Some strong voices were coming out, especially when talking about issues like issues of citizenship. Women are affected very much because sometimes you'll find that there were some women who were married to South Sudanese, and maybe they are from the northern part of the country, they are from Sudan, let me say, and here they are in South Sudan. There have been a lot of issues to do with citizenship, which maybe some people weren't aware of. But these are some of the issues that women try to bring up during the discussions, and they participated also in bringing out the gendered aspects of some issues. For example, when addressing issues of security, from a male perspective, there are some things that might not be seen, but women brought these issues out, and they were able to be recognized as necessary voices in the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Margaret. Back to you, Ms. Jacqueline. What is the difference? Can you please tell us the difference between a transitional constitution and a permanent constitution?
Okay, thank you, Stella. I think in most of the time, people get confused, especially when we are talking about amendment of a constitution and the constitutional development process. And I think this had been going on, and the debate started like long time ago because South Sudan didn't have a permanent constitution. So I could say that the difference between a transitional constitution or interim constitution and a permanent constitution is that a transitional constitution is given for a specific time frame. It has a specific time in which it can be used. And then after that, time elapses, and then it's subject to a review or an amendment. And in our case for South Sudan, I think we have undergone series of transitions of constitution, and I don't blame citizens or people when we confuse the two. So I could say that a permanent constitution is that constitution which is developed. It can be, some sections can be amended, but it cannot be redeveloped. So like once you have a constitution, and then you can only propose an amendment, and that amendment cannot just be brought simply because someone wakes up in the middle of the night and say tomorrow we have to amend it. It has to go through serious processes for the amendment, and the reasons have to be genuine. So you cannot just amend it for one person or for one political party as such. It has no definite time frame for a permanent constitution because it's there to stay. You can only propose amendments, but you cannot change it. Transitional constitutions emerge from conflict settings. Like, for example, in our situation in South Sudan, we had the Southern Sudan interim constitution by then, and then we moved to the transitional constitution, and now we are moving into the development of the permanent constitution. So it's emerging from a conflict, and it goes with the time frame for which a transitional period is defined. And that has worked in other countries, including in Iraq, and where they had to come out with a new constitution process. Libya had a transitional constitution, and even now Sudan also has a transitional constitution. So it emerges from a conflict situation, and then you develop a constitution that can govern a sovereign state. So in our country, South Sudan, in 2013, following the crisis, we are still struggling to have a permanent constitution. So I would just say that let's not confuse when we talk about amendment of a constitution and a permanent constitution, and say like a permanent constitution can also be reviewed. So that is not right, because a permanent constitution, once it's put in place, and then you can only propose amendments, and not all of it can be amended. But in the transitional constitution, you are moving towards developing a permanent constitution. So also the R-axis, which is the revitalized peace agreement, is also giving us another opportunity now to come out with our permanent constitution. Permanent constitutions go through rigorous processes. Some of them go through a referendum, and some of them go through popular consultations, whereas transitional or interim constitution comes with peace processes in most times, and it just addresses that specific time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jacqueline. Back to you, Honorable Voska Martin. Voska, how is the Women Caucus positioning itself in the constitutional making process?
Thank you very much, Mrs. Stella KG, and the listeners. Yes, let me talk a bit brief on the issue of the caucus, how it came about. When we came in 2010 elections, general elections, we found ourselves that we're unable to cope up with the situation. As one of the speakers was saying, they were the minority in that house. Then we say, no, we must have a forum where we'll have our discussions before we come to the debate. And then we made a steering committee to form a caucus. Why the objective of forming the caucus was, one, if we have an agenda that needs to be discussed, one like maybe a bill is brought to the parliament, or maybe a financial bill mostly, how are women going to give up their voices? Then we say, let us form a caucus. This caucus is non-partisan. When you are coming to be a member, you leave all your party aside. We concentrate now on what is the agenda of women in that bill. After we came up with that caucus, we went for several meetings, several trainings and meetings. Because when we came in, some women were not in the parliament before, some were in the state parliament who got some trainings from ISIS Wiki and so many organizations, women organizations, we came to train us. After knowing that, now we are able to raise, because others were not knowing how to raise motion, information, how to stand in that big house where you have all sorts of people are there, doctors, what. So it was difficult. And then now when we formed the caucus, we now have a space where we can talk. We then had several meetings, trainings that made us now to get knowledge how we can be in that parliament and how to raise voice, how to debate with everyone. We now get that we are now knowledge about how we can raise motions. Now, in the process, and when the issue of the constitution amendment came about, I think some of us, I got an opportunity to be with Merkaje, Lona Merkeze, and so many, not forgetting our late icon lady, Mama Mary, late Mary Kiden, she was with us, and so many others. She really put us, and then we went how we can position ourselves as women caucus to be among. We made so many public hearings with women groups, youth, and what to get also some ideas for them. What do they want to be put in the constitution? One, there are so many bills that we had wanted to amend by then because it is a reform section, a reform time. And then we, in the constitution making process, when we are with those of Lona, we found out that we need to reform the bills. One of the bills is the national security bill, is the prison bill, is the police bill, is the wildlife, and so to mention few, these were the bills that we found that it has to be amended and entered into the constitution. So this was how the process, the caucus positioned itself to be on the process. We have done several meetings and several trainings with some organizations and some civil society that we have come up with several constitution, how to amend the constitution. It is how the caucus are making all the efforts to be part of the amendment of the constitution making process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Ms. Julia Akuru. Can you please tell us what challenges do you face as a women lawyers in the review process?
I'd say that organizing as women lawyers is relatively new as opposed to the women's movement that has been there for a while. Our attempts to organize have started from as recent as 2010. So the challenges associated with organizing and establishing are still very real for us as a new organization. But more specifically with regards to the constitutional review process, the current National Constitutional Review process, which is under the auspices of the National Constitutional Amendment Committee, has entailed the drafting amendments to the transitional constitution to incorporate the ACSIS, the peace agreements, as well as review certain key laws that are spelled under the peace agreement, such as the security sector laws and the petroleum laws. FIDA has held a number of workshops together with women in the security sector, in the army, the police, the fire brigades, to review these security sector laws and make proposals for strengthening gender equality and sealing gender gaps in the laws, which proposals were presented to the NCAC. But I think one of a significant barrier, I think, for women lawyers has been language, because in a lot of these review processes, English is the official language that is there. Some of the terms of reference that we receive for participation in some of the committees, such as the technical committee that we've received recently for the consultations around the committee for the Commission for Reconciliation and Healing, is English. And I think being schooled in Arabic presents a challenge to participation in some of these formal processes. Another key challenge is funding. Without sufficient funding, then we cannot frequently hold timely consultations on the various law reform proposals. We cannot hold consultations in the states on key areas of laws. We cannot sufficiently print and disseminate civic education materials, some of which we prepared for past processes, but which we still find are relevant today. But lastly, I would say that also one of the challenges is that the legal profession in South Sudan is still very largely male. The more women lawyers that we can have on the bench, in the prosecutions, in the Ministry of Justice, and certainly the more we can be able to influence the constitutional processes from different entry points, be it at the entry point of the ministry or whichever different entry points that are there.
Thank you very much, Ms. Julia. for the wonderful answer. Back to you, Ms. Jacqueline. Jacqueline, why does the Constitution matter for a country and the people?
Thank you, Stella. I think that question was asked when I answered, like, why is a constitution important? So probably I can go to the next question if you don't mind.
You put them 1 and 2.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Can you please describe the step for the constitution making in light of the peace agreement and the transitional constitution?
Okay. Thank you. I think one of the things I'll probably say first before I go to the steps is that we need to look at the guiding principles of a good constitution. If we are talking about a constitution, what are the basics that we think should enter into a constitution, or the characteristics of a good constitution that we are looking into? And therefore, I would like to highlight the few principles that if we are going to be participating in the drafting processes or contributing our voices as women, these are the things that we need to look out into. One is that we need to have a strong constitution that can be respected by all, regardless of their political status, regardless of their religion, sex, economic status, and social status. So supremacy of the constitution becomes very important. And I think we have seen in most countries, they take their oath using their constitutions, and that symbolizes like their constitution is very strong and supreme. The other one is that we need to look at the fundamental rights and freedoms. And I think this one Julia mentioned, like the basic Bill of Rights. And I'll say that a constitution without the basic freedoms and fundamental rights is a bad constitution. A good constitution must protect the fundamental rights and freedoms of its people. That include freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of assembly, and freedom of movement. And it should uphold the rule of law, women's rights, and the affirmative action. So when we are participating in the drafting process, we need to make sure like the fundamental rights and freedoms are enshrined in our constitution. And this will help us also to avoid these things of saying early marriages, forced marriages, and guaranteeing the rights of women as in the Bill of Rights. The other one is that we need to know that the Constitution is supreme. All other laws should be derived from the Constitution, not the reverse where the Constitution become like a useless document and there are different laws which are drafted and they are stronger than our Constitution. So we need to make sure like all other laws that we are reviewing conform to the Constitution. And if they are missing in the current draft, and then we make sure like we put them in the Constitution. The other one is that a good constitution should be able to define the democratic system of governance. For example, if we are talking about unitary government, federal government, or we are talking about the separation of powers and the participation of people becomes very important in our constitution. And this has to be spelled. And that's why when we are talking about our current constitution, it gives women the right to participate in all aspects of public life. And this means if we are going for the constitutional drafting process, we have to ensure like this is guaranteed in that, and that the governance system is clearly defined. A constitution should be able to resolve conflict or issues that are likely to tear a country apart. Like for example, given our experience of the conflict, most of our social fabric and cohesion is broken, and we are in a process of working towards peace. So which means we should have a constitution that is likely to resolve conflict, promote dialogue, and also accommodate different opinions, including opinions of the different political actors and stakeholders. The other one is that a constitution should take into consideration the diversity of the people, looking at the regional diversity, looking at the ethnic diversity, and looking at also preserving our history as a nation. One thing that we miss in our constitution is looking at what type of state are we and what languages to be used. Up to now, we still don't have a national language. All national languages are what we use. So we have 64 tribes and we define them as all national languages. So it's not like maybe when you go to Kenya or other parts, you'll find Swahili or other national languages recognized. So also the constitution should be able to take into consideration those diversities, but also diversity in unity. And then finally, it should guarantee stability, national unity, and territorial integrity. So that is also very important, and this comes with defining the territory of South Sudan and its international relations. Coming to the steps now, which is the question you just asked, I'll say that there are different steps in our current constitution making process. I just highlighted about 6 stages that I think are very crucial if we are to participate in these processes. One is that the participation or the conduct of the constitutional workshop, which is to be conducted 1 month, 4 months from the time of the transitional period. So with this current transitional period, I'm not going to be talking about the periods because we have already passed most of them, but I'll just say that within this transitional period, the following are the stages that we are supposed to be taking. One is the constitutional workshop, which is to be conducted with the support of RJMEC and also an institution which is internationally recognized. And I think people are talking about the Max Planck Institute being part of that. So this constitutional conference is to discuss the details for the constitutional making process. And it's to inform the legislative drafting process for the constitutional making. So there's going to be a law that stipulates how the constitutional development process is going to be. And this law can be developed in consultations during this workshop and also how it's going to be participatory. Already the members of this are spelled out from the RJMEC, but I'll say that as we know, the participation of women in these mechanisms is less. So this could be another opportune time for us as women intellectuals that advocating for women to be added at least to participate in this constitutional workshop, and we can make our voice to be heard. The second stage, I could say, is where the Minister of Justice developed the Constitutional Development Act, which is the bill now that defines how public consultations are going to be done, who are the members that can be in the commission, how are they going to be appointed, the selection criteria, and the rest. So this is an important stage. And I think if these bodies are going to be reconstituted, and then we should make sure that at least women don't come from the lean line of saying you come from civil society, you come from women bloc, and then we have a list of members who are mostly are going to be sending in women. So we need also to look at this stage critically. And I think we are honored that we have our Member of Parliament here, Honorable Voska, such that when this law goes to Parliament and we realize that, oh, this the interest of women is not covered in this law and the affirmative action is not reflected in the bodies that are going to be constituted, and then we alert her, and then we help them to be able to generate a debate that will guarantee our participation guarantee our participation under the law and in the constitutional process. Stage 3 is the enactment of the legislation by Artigonu for the reconstitution of this National Constitutional Review Commission. And I think this National Review Commission is going to be reconstituted. The debate now, which is ongoing, is whether reconstitution means bringing in new people or just adding more people to what is existing now. And I think it's important we as women, we assess, and given that we have had the experiences from our female members who had been in this commission, they had done tremendous job, and we should start shaping the discussion to look at how do we keep our sisters who are already there and probably add more women voices to that. And I think when we did the gender analysis of the process by then, and also looking at the composition of the NCRC, we had more men than women in the NCRC. So probably this is also one advocacy point where we can say in the reconstitution, we need to have more women in decision-making of this body and also as members of this commission. Stage 4 is where we are going to have the Constitutional Conference. And in this constitutional conference, there will be a preparatory committee, which is going to be established. And this preparatory committee will now be the one to prepare for the conduct of the National Constitutional Conference. And this means the stakeholders in this constitutional conference are going to come from the different groups, including women groups, civil society, faith-based, youth, and this means women have to prepare. We can come from these stakeholders, like from the youth, from the women, and from the civil society. And this constitutional conference is very critical because it's going to look at the draft, which is prepared by the Constitutional Review Commission, deliberate on it, and adopt it. And if we realize that some of the things that we propose as women were not taken into consideration from the stage of the NCRC, and then we can make propositions and also make reservations, which is very important here to make sure, like, as women, we endorse this, but we also have reservations because this is not taken into consideration. The fifth stage that I could talk of is where the Minister of Justice now present this draft to the Constitutional Conference. And this Constitutional Conference can be transformed to what is called now the Constituent Assembly, which is from the Parliament now transformed to the Constituent Assembly. And we need to make sure also that in the upcoming appointments, women are not left out in the Parliament. Already we are marginalized in the executive, and I'll say that the Parliament, if we are marginalized also, and then we need to see how can we advocate for more women to be in the Constituent Assembly, such that when the final adoption of the Constitution is going to be taking place, women's voices are added. One important thing I could say is that when civil society women and women from political parties, and I think some of them are still here, and the FIDA was there, Sudemop was there, Suen was there. We had the Women's Constitutional Conference, and women did not only look at the issue of percentages in the Constitution, but women were able to review the Constitution from the first page to the last page and looking at issues that are not necessarily for women, and issues including term limits, issues including power sharing, issues including limitations of powers and how resources can be used. And I think at the Constituent Assembly, that could also be an opportunity for women now to see how are the different voices consolidated before the Constituent Assembly could adopt the draft. The final stage is the sixth, which I think is very important also, where the president is to assent to the constitution and adopt it as our permanent constitution. And during the time when the women held the constitutional conference, the president was able to tell the women when we presented the petition that if your voices are not heard in the permanent constitution, the draft that will come to me, alert me, and I will not sign it. So I think this is also another important stage for us to remind the president when the time comes, and if we feel like the issues we raised are not really genuinely taken into consideration, and make another recommendation like this is the voice of the women, and Mr. President, we feel these things are not taken into consideration and would like to bring it to attention before you sign. And I think Voska talked about the legislative processes until it's adopted. And I think those are important for us as we look into the constitutional development process. Thank you. Back to you, Stella.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Ms. Jacqueline. I have one question for you. According to our constitution, is Arabic still the official language?
Our official language is English, and then our national languages are all our national languages. It could be Kakwa, Kuku, Dinka, Nuer, every language which is a local language is recognized as a national language. But Arabic is not our national language, but there is a phrase that says it has to face with time. And already, I think in our judiciary, there was a circular by the former Chief Justice, God rest his soul in peace, where he said English is going to be the official language, but it has to be through a gradual process. So I think Arabic is not our official language, although it's still in use. And this is to consider like those who have studied in Arabic to gradually adopt and we use English.
All right, thank you very much, Jacqueline, for the clarification. I'm seeing Mrs. Lona has already joined us. Welcome, Ms. Lona.
Thank you very much. And apologies for everything.
You finally made it. I'm happy that you have made it finally.
I know I had to do this. It's supposed to be a 10 minutes drive, but I made it in less than 10 minutes, yes.
Wow, thank you for that. Thank you very much. We really appreciate that. Before I ask your questions, I have one question that goes to Honorable Voska. Honorable Voska, can you hear me? Honorable Voska.
Yes, I'm getting you.
Okay, I have a question that comes from one of the audience. Are you getting me?
I'm getting you, please.
Oh, what does the Constitution say about the election and the cascas?
Sorry, come again.
We have one question for you that comes from one of our audience. The question says, what does the Constitution say about the election process and the census?
Yeah, thank you very much, the moderator. I think in the Constitution is saying before the election, census first of all has to take place to know how many people in a country are registered and how many are going to vote. After doing this, the first process is population. The second now will be what? Will be election. And election is supposed, according to the Constitution, and as said by many speakers here, as the Constitution is the document that gives you all the views of the country, how you make governance gives you a rule of law to govern your country. In the Constitution, we are supposed to go every 5 years, we go for election. And every 5 years, we go to population, to census, where we know how many people, how many millions are people in South Sudan, and how many millions do they want to vote? How many people do want to vote? So in this process, this is how it is said in the Constitution, that every 5 years, we go for census and we go for election. But based on the issue in South Sudan, as all of us know very well that South Sudan has gone for 2 decades, that is 2 or 25 years for war now, and we are unable to set up the real governance in our country. That has pushed us up to now. I'm even going for 10 or 11 years, which was not supposed to be for me to be in the parliament. If I want to come in the parliament, I'm supposed to go for election. Every 5 years, you come back. Every 5 years or 4 years, according to what we put in our Constitution, then you come back for another election. If you fail, you succeed, it is based on the election that is specialized in the Constitution. But now we are still in the parliament, not because we want to be there, but based on the civil war which took place in our country that enabled us to go for election. By now, by the end of the agreement, that says the agreement will go for 36 months, and then later on we go for census, and then later census, then we go for general elections. I think that is the clarification that I know and which is there in the Constitution, which we are supposed to be abided by.
All right, thank you, Honorable, for the clarification. Now back to you, Ms. Lona. Lona?
Yes.
Yeah, back to you.
Yes.
I'll try to ask you your first 3 questions, then you answer them. Can you hear me, Lona?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yeah, I've said I'll try to ask you the first 3 questions. You answer them.
Okay.
All right. As a civil society organization leader with experience in South Sudan constitutional making process, what are some of your experiences with the NCRC and NCAC processes as a women and civil society organization? What opportunity does the process give women?
Well, thank you very much. as I had said earlier, I don't know if I was clear. One of the things that I experienced, and I would say is an experience that need to be shared, is that the moment you enter in such spaces as a woman and as a civil society activist, you are a minority. And you definitely need to know that you're a minority voice. Number two is that the space is quite hostile. There's a lot of intimidation that happens in that space, which one needs to know. And some of us experience it without knowing, and we had to toughen up. Number three is that what I realized, which was striking, is that most of the statements that we make as civil society or as women groups, we just send it to media. They get seen, but it rarely finds its way into these spaces in a more formidable way. So there's need for us to know that there is somebody inside that will definitely pick on our statement. And then number four, which sounds very strange, you may not think about it, but naturally when you get into these spaces, with due respect, Honorable Voska, the politicians will think that you as a civil society activist or as a women's representative, you should always make your submissions or interventions last. So there is that discrimination. I remember when I first went to National Constitution Review Commission, we were having a discussion on the rule of procedure, and I raised my hand before a prominent member of government in this country, who is a member of the commission as well. And the chair gave me the opportunity, but when he raised his hand, the chair changed his mind. And I had to just start talking and stood up. So you realize, and that has continued not only with NCRC, but even in NCSC, in other spaces, the thinking is that the civil society and the women and the non-political actors should always come last after the political actors. And that experience is so striking because then it puts you in a disadvantaged position if you accept it. But to change that and to be able to bring equality into that space in as much as your minority voice requires a bit of strategy. And one needs to be very tactful about it. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lorna. What are the best practices and lessons learned for the effective engagement and consultation in the process?
Well, based on what I've just shared, I would say that some of the best practices is that traditionally, and as civil society, as women groups, we are going to continue to write statements because that is our way of communicating. We are going to have submissions. We are going to have maybe petitions. What I would say I have learned as a lesson is that whenever we have those petitions, when we have those statements, it's important for us to speak and share it with an insider as one-on-one basis. That will help propel our voices. Number two is that the moment you step in those spaces, knowing all the factors that I mentioned first and the position that you are in, it's important to create alliances with the people who are inside that space, and especially the politicians and those from the main political actors into the space, because then that gives you leverage. But creating that alliance, you also have to be very specific and be able to have something you put on table that makes you a good ally for them to allow a bigger space. And by doing that, I would also say that asserting yourself with specific principles is very important. That is a lesson that I have learned from there, that when you get into these spaces and if you want to be respected, one, you need to get there with your principles, Number two is that those principles should not be negotiable. And that forms a space around you, but a space where you're constantly creating substance in it so that your worth is always being seen by the giants in the space. And then by seeing your worth, you're able to then represent your stakeholder group and amplify their voices. When I talk about making your worth to be recognized, is easy said than done, because then you need to research about the interest of the players in that space, and then you need to have issues that are of interest to your stakeholder and to their constituency, to your constituency and their constituency. And when you champion those issues, then it's clearly being seen like you are an ally. And if today I championed an issue that we share together, tomorrow you are likely to buy more allies. So it's something that requires a bit of calculation. And I would say that the lesson learned from there is the space is very calculative and it requires some good calculation. Yes, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lona. Then, for the interest of time, I'll try just to skip to the next question. What were the achievements of the NCRC? What are the critical issues discussed? Were they resolved?
Well, I would say that the achievement of NCRC is that work was done, and NCRC did a bit of consultation, which was not adequate, but then there are documents that have already been generated. Colleagues like Margaret Mathiang would agree with me that the subcommittees did a lot of work on reviewing the contents of the Constitution, and that work can be kept in the archive. But there are issues that were discussed, and they still remain contentious. And as we embark on constitution making process again in South Sudan, I think those issues are still going to emerge, like the issues of marriageable age. That was an issue that we had heated discussion on, and we didn't resolve the issue. Number two is that issues of nationality, it was an issue. And I know it will come again in the constitution making process. The other thing is that the issue of land tenure is something that needs to be looked at. And I remember one of the discussion in plenary, it's like we are all having divergent views, and we decided that let's go back to the drawing board and start seeing it from the CPA. Why was it said that the land belongs to the people, and how do we take that into the progression that the country is getting into? So there are several issues, and currently we are also going to anticipate more issues. That time we didn't have the issue of governance, the system of governance as a contentious issue, but I think this time round it's going to be a contentious issue. Not whether we are going federal or not, but it's what kind of federation are we going for as South Sudan. And also there's also a question of boundaries. I think boundaries is also going to be a problem. During that time, we touched a bit, but we didn't discuss much about it. But already you can see the tension that comes with that. So those are some of the issues that I would highlight. And I think there is opportunity in this process for women. And as women, we have to keep following the process and identifying the opportunities for us, because it opens up the constitution so that we are able to fix in the things that favor interest of women and bring women at par with men in this country. Yes, over to you, Stella.
All right, thank you very much, Miss Lona. Back to you, Miss Jacqueline. There is a question from one of our audience that says, what is family law and why is it important to have family law? Jacqueline?
Okay, thank you very much. Family law is the law that governs the family setting. And I think most of the things that we discuss, including marriageable age, including customary practices, land, divorce, and definition of marriages even, and what is legal marriage and not legal marriage. All these are defined in a family law. So family law is important for us in South Sudan because we have laws that do not guarantee the rights of women in regards to, for example, land issues, property ownership, the rights of widow, inheritance, what is marriage, you know. So this becomes important in that when we have the family law, these issues can be ironed out and they can be stipulated in the family law. Looking back into the Maputo Protocol, it has good component of how families are governed. And I think we have adopted the Maputo Protocol, but it's not signed into law by the president. So that means we still have a gap on how issues of marriage and issues of wife inheritance, issues of women owning property and inheriting property of their husbands or of their parents. All these are also things that need a family law, and a family law will play a big role in resolving some of these issues.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline, for the clarification. Back to you, Ms. Margaret Mathiang. Margaret, what was the participation of grassroots women in the civic education and public consultation? How can women be empowered to participate in the process? And what role did International Commission play in supporting the process? How can citizens influence and drive the process?
Thank you very much, Stella, once again. Before I talk about the participation of women in the grassroots in civic education, let me tackle the question of what is civic education itself. When we talk about civic education in a constitutional making process, we can define it as an activity that helps prepare the public to participate, both before and after the constitution is prepared and adopted. Let me repeat this one. Civic education is in a constitutional making process can be defined as any activity that helps prepare the public to participate both before and after the constitution is prepared and adopted. Why am I repeating this question? Because I just want to reflect that civic education is a continuous process. Even when we are through and have a permanent constitution, issues of civic education should continue. For example, a country like Gambia, there's a civic education kind of commission as an institution, and maybe that's one of the issues that should come out in the after the constitutional review process is over. So in the official mandate of the commission when it was formed with this from a presidential order, the mandate of the commission was of twofold. One is to review the transitional constitution of South Sudan, the transitional constitution, and make recommendation deemed necessary. And civic education was also there, conduct a nationwide civic education on constitutional issues. I also want to highlight that citizen participation in constitution making is a key democratic component to state stability, and people's driven constitution is a primary component of a stable state. In the discussions or in the civic education and even in public consultations, issues to do with security, for example, it's an opportunity for people to talk about issues like cattle wrestling, like abduction of women and children. And when these issues are solved, of course, the nation will be stable. I also want to say that the processes of conducting the civic education had a number of steps. First of all, the NCRC prepared an elaborate civic education action plan, which begins with launching a launching event which was held in June 29, 2013. You see, this is like almost 8 years ago. And the action plan included 3 phases of the process. One is civic education. The second process was public consultation, and the third one was submission. We all know that in 2013, this process was interrupted, and so it did not some of these stages were not reached. But civic education was conducted, as Don Americaji mentioned, to some extent. There was a lot of information that was gathered, and if they are reviewed today, some of these issues are still relevant until today. So there was also a development of a manual through support from NDI, that's National Democratic Institute. I would like to take this opportunity to appreciate the enormous role that was played by our sister Jacqueline Nasiwa, who is a panelist in this, in supporting this process of development of a manual. This manual was user-friendly. It had some pictorials, and it was used for the grassroots civic education consultations. Jacqueline, thank you so much. You supported the process wholeheartedly. And if anyone talks about partner support, the name Jacqueline Nasiwa always comes out. There was also engagement of the commissioners in media and different radio programs. I want to mention that some of the people who really contributed enormously in the radio programs, we have both female and male commissioners, like Honorable McQuaid, we have Honorable late Kalamanjanda, may God rest his soul in peace, Honorable Bureng, and we also have our female commissioners that I mentioned earlier. So the process was very participatory. I need to mention that. And the media was very much engaged in following up the process. Now coming back to the question of how the women in the grassroots were prepared, I just want to go back again to what was mentioned earlier by one of the participants, that the civil society held some trainings and some workshops. I also want to add that civil society prepared the ground actually for these consultations. They conducted a consultation in the 10 states. So when the commissioners went there to the states, already the ground was prepared through the support of civil society. And I want to mention that at this junction that constitutional making process is not one institutional thing. It should be a collective responsibility. Civil society, government, partners to support the process, and so forth. So women in the grassroots were consulted when the teams visited the states. And as Lona Merkaji mentioned, there were some thematic areas. There was thematic areas on judiciary, executive, legislation, boundaries, and civic education was like cross-cutting. The participation of women in the grassroots was felt, but we feel that it can be improved much better in the next processes because they'll need to be prepared fully, because this time, the context is different from the previous time to now. We are now in the context of the implementation of the revitalized peace agreement. So I'm sure when the consultation is done, the people who are going on ground should also have knowledge about the access, the revitalized agreement, and how it is connected to the transitional constitution that is being reviewed. Thank you. I hope I answered all. Over.
Thank you very much, Ms. Margaret Mathiang. Back to you, Honorable Voska. But before I go to your question, I'll just like to give you 1 minute chance to talk about the family law and what is the importance of this law.
Thank you very much, Margaret.
For the interest of time, please.
Sorry?
I said I'll give you a chance of 1 minute to talk about family law and its importance.
Yeah, according to us here in the parliament, in fact, the family law is supposed to come as a private law, and we have been helping or doing that work long. As mentioned, it was Honorable Beatrice. We have already at least tried to put those laws. We went to Uganda and we have met our counterparts, and we try to know from them how can we come up with that bill. But for me, actually, as a member of parliament, not as a woman, I've seen the importance of family law. You, my dear speakers who are in this forum today, you have seen how many times women have been having problem, more especially when it comes to divorce. Either you end up, the kids may end up with a woman who is going to suffer with the kids. There are so many examples that I can give why we need that family law, very important in South Sudan. And when it comes to issue of heritage, we have seen more especially in my tribe where I'm coming from. It says once you have built a house with a husband, let me just give an example. The day he will die, for us in my tradition, you called only the name. You don't take anything and you don't look back. The house you built, things that you bought in that house are no longer yours. So you tend to go without anything. Even at times children, nobody asks you about the children. How are the children going to how are the children going to live with their mom or their uncle or their niece or what? Nobody asks you in Zande tradition. It's very, very, very terrible. So that's why for me, more importantly, I need that law to be tabled to the parliament so that we add so much salt to it. Because we have seen our women who are suffering, even in the places where they are married, maybe those who are married with the cows, and then I not really know if somebody might have what has happened to other sisters from other ethnic group, that when they marry a woman for a man who is dead, that in that law, when we come now in a family laws, that things need to be stipulated very clearly. How can I be married to a man who is dead, and again he will marry another woman called that is his wife? For me, I've been married to a man who is dead. So those things all, if family law act or come, then we'll be able to put those things in order. There are so many things in South Sudan. Women at times cannot buy a land unless you give a money to your brother to buy for you, and then he takes it back to be given to you. In other ethnic, it is happening. That's why we are really focusing on the issue of the family laws, not only the marriageable age we are talking about. It has been a tug of war between us and our counterparts, male in the parliament. They are saying a lady is already matured when she's 18. My sisters who are here, is your daughter matured at age of 18? Is she ready to be a mom, to get married? When has she finished her university, secondary school and university? And mind you, now you see the corona issue now. 2 years, almost 2 years, our kids has been in the house. Now, if she was 16 or 17 last year, it means now she's ready to get married. Are you allowing that? So in the family law, all those things will be put in order, and will support, and will be in the giant front to fight for the rights of our children for the future. Thank you. Back to you, the moderator.
Thank you very much, Honorable Voska. Yeah, it is very challenging, especially when it comes to issues to do with women inheritance, early forced marriages. That's why we insist, and then we still push for that law to be presented by the parliament so that at least people should know their rights. Now back to you, Honorable. As a female MP, what has been your and other female MPs' experiences in adoption or amendment of laws?
You know, as in the parliament, there's nothing that you will do outside the law. We have the conduct of business, what is called, it is the internal regulations that guides you. But more especially when you have an agenda and you want to pass that agenda, and you want that agenda to be adopted by any other person, first of all, you have to lobby. You lobby your counterpart that are male. They are not all male in the parliament are bad, but some males are really adhering to what we have been going through. Others, though, they are very tedious, but you have to make them your friend. After you make friends with them, you lobby them, you present your issues. And that's why the Women Caucus have that space. Once we tackle our issues in the Women Caucus, then we now lobby. There are also honorary male counterparts who are with us in the caucus. They have registered, they are paying the membership, they are members, they are with us. Anything, we tune to them. And one of it, a speaker even can be a honorary member in the caucus. take him there, so that wherever you want to pass, you first he will lobby, make that process of lobbying. Once you lobby, it has not been, because you are passing, you have to explain to them why this bill need to be passed. And more special, like the CEDAW, the Maputo Protocol, when we are passing it, it wanted to have to hold on, but we have to stick. And these are the things that we saw, because they are in the Maputo Protocol and the CEDAW, there are a lot of fund which was supposed to be given for women's of force for so many projects, but it didn't happen because of, one, the war of 2016, which also dragged us back, and then also the pandemic, which is there now. There are a lot of things which are lying in the CEDAW, in fact, which the South Sudan has not yet achieved its main mandate in that CEDAW. So in all, in the parliament, we don't have, there's no minute time that will be given to you so that they say, now this time is for women to wake up. No, or to talk. You must push. Once you must adhere to yourself to read, you must attend to news, social media, magazines, watch TVs, watch news. What are there? Once you have known yourself with the internal regulations, which is called the conduct of business, then you are aware, you are knowledgeable how to raise your voice with the men together and fight all the corners, and you will lobby them. Some will support you, some will drop. Even male, female members, at times they don't support, because also we have our, very well that we have our inner problem. But when it comes to serious issues, we really lobby male, and then they accept us to pass that law as needed. That's how we have been doing it. There is no specific time given for women, but the speaker, you have to contact the speaker. Say we have something like that we want to do. Then he will give you, during the debate inside, you have to split yourself into all the corners, because we have 3 to 4 corners. Sit accordingly. When you are not picked, then you come up with another version. Say maybe clarification, say information, say we are raising a motion. But before I raise a motion, I have this one to make a clarification. In such way, there is no discrimination much in the parliament, because we know all the procedures. If I'm not picked, I will come with another one. Until I'm picked today, you have to be vocal so that your voice is heard. That is all the process that we have been going through. Back to you, the moderator.
Thank you very much, Honorable. Now, Ms. Julie Akur. Is the current constitutional review process gender sensitive?
From my view, we've never really given ourselves sufficient time to have a proper constitutional process. And the past processes we have had have been very restricted in mandate and have been constrained for time. So starting from the interim drafting committee, the committee did have women on it, but was restrained for time. And the time constraint meant that extensive public consultations could not take place. And those extensive public consultations included consultations with women. Our next constitutional review process saw the establishment of a committee with a limited mandate to make changes to the interim constitution of Southern Sudan, translate it into an independent transitional constitution for the Republic of South Sudan. Again, that committee worked under very limited time constraints. I believe they had possibly very limited time constraints, budgetary constraints as well as a limited mandate. So the transitional constitution, however, we appreciate that it does spell out a roadmap, and I think we've been through that roadmap for the permanent constitutional process that led to the establishment of the NCRC, that had the roadmap that has already been discussed. However, the NCRC, I think we acknowledge, had a number of women on it, although it's been said again that not sufficient numbers of women were there. They did hold a number of public consultations, as has been highlighted. But again, the time constraint, the budgetary constraints, and then also I believe it was overtaken by political events due to the conflicts, and right now has been rendered largely, I don't know if I could say largely defunct, or we are not sure what the status of the NCRC is right now. Right now, we have the National and its mandate was extended by the revised peace agreement. The NCAC, we know, has held a number of public consultations to consult with women groups and the public. However, the mandate of the NCAC, again, we all know, is limited to amending the transitional constitution to incorporate the peace agreements and to review certain key laws that have been outlined in the peace agreement. From the public statements that we have had, I believe the NCAC has tried to interpret its mandate a bit more liberally and seems to be willing to review other laws not specifically mentioned under the peace agreement, but may have a bearing on the implementation of that agreement. But again, like all the previous committees before that, this is also constrained for time. The mandate is constrained and has budgetary constraints. Right now, we have the additional difficulties and realities of COVID. But I think a positive aspect of the whole process with the National Committee, the National Constitutional Amendment Committee, is that it's tasked and mandated to outline or to begin the conversation around the permanent constitutional process. What will that process look like? And beginning to bring stakeholders around the table so that we can now for once chart a proper process for the permanent constitution. So in summary, just to say that our past processes, I don't believe, have been gender sensitive. But for it to be gender sensitive, I believe what we should be looking at is at the expert level of the Constitutional Review Commission, which should be an independent expert body. We should have that minimum quota, a minimum threshold, a critical mass of women who can be able to make decisions within that commission. And then we also appreciate that not everybody can be at the drafting table. So the commission has to have sufficient time, sufficient budget to be able to go out and conduct public consultations. And I believe women have proven to be very effective in the past in networking, forging alliances, and reaching out to other women. So that sufficient time, budgetary allocations will allow them to conduct sufficient civic education that can bring the ordinary views of the women to the table.
Thank you very much, Ms. Akul. Thank you very much. Sorry for the internet. We are having some unsetup, and the internet is like misbehaving now, but it's now okay. It's now fine. Coming back to you, Honorable Voska. Honorable Voska, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm getting you.
What recommendations can you give in ensuring the permanent constitution process and draft text are gender sensitive?
Thank you.
2 minute recommendation, please, as we are having some challenges with the internet.
Yeah, thank you very much, moderator. I think for me, first of all, in the last constitution, though we have made some highlight or some move, but still we want to make some public hearings mostly, so that we get the voices of each and everyone. Because in the first, you know that constitution making is like it is an expertise. That's what the citizens are saying, that maybe the language they are not getting. What we need to do is dissemination of the constitution itself. There are paragraphs and articles which are not understood by the citizens. So we need some public hearings now and then to be taken into account, so that to make people understand the constitution. How do we go about the constitution, and what are the things that we can add in the constitution? Because last time, I think in CPA, by then I was working with Angel, but I got enough time to be in Rumbek. It was open for all classic of people. You come, women, group, youth, and then they give the ideas. Then the expertise change the language into a legal language. What I'm saying, I'm not a legal person, but the legal person knows what she or he puts here to make it a word or sentence. So that is the same thing we need for our round when we come back again for the constitution making and the consideration of, so because it is, for me, I'm seeing this constitution is not gender sensitive for sure. Because I can add, when you see there are some small only articles, that are included, like the right of women, which age could be bill. It is not for me, it is not gender sensitive, because some of the majority of the people were not really allowed, although not all of people can be around the table as said, but we can make some scoop that this scoop here, women group, please, we try to collect from each group as chairpersons and the deputies and what, from all the organizations. And then also the same for youth and the same for business people and same for what? Because they want to see it that in all these sectors, all of them are also have put their voice to know how the constitution of the country will look alike. Back to you, moderator.
Honorable. Back to you, Ms. Lona. In 2 minutes, please, can you tell us some of the challenges the civil society encountering in trying to participate in the constitution-making process, and what are recommendations moving forward?
Well, thank you very much. What I would say is that the phenomenon of civil society participation in national civic pursuits is something that is gaining momentum at the moment. And unfortunately, or fortunately, in our country, that still becomes a very difficult question, though it has improved enormously as we move on. I would say that one of the challenges that we face is often there's no receptiveness for the ideas that we bring as civil society. We have to work extra hard to be able to table these ideas. Number two is that you realize that the resources are often not mainstream. What I mean by mainstream is that in this country, unlike other countries, we don't have a budget line in the national budget which goes towards supporting those kind of activities that create space or encouraging implementing agencies, spending agencies to work with the public, and working with the public is through civil society. So the challenge that we face is that we have to make an extra mile to look, extra step to look for resources from development partners. And more often than not, the agenda of the development partners or their mandate may not necessarily be explicitly in line with our mandate. So the civil society sometimes find it very difficult to get the funds timely. But the other challenge that I would talk about, which is very sad, is that in as much as what we are doing is a contribution to development and prosperity of this country, the security and the national institutions, and especially the security apparatus, sometimes they completely misunderstand us. And they think what we are doing is a threat to the nation, and they clamp us down, and they try to make the situation difficult for us. They tend to restrict our engagement with the public. And sometimes when we want to do public statements or we want to do public engagements, then it becomes very difficult because you've not been given security clearance. So those are some of the things that civil society face. And my recommendation to that is we need to educate not only the public, but we need to educate even the government or state actors on the role of civil society in building a country. You know, South Sudan is a nation that requires every effort from every sector of the society to be able to put the country on track, to be able to embark and do meaningful nation building or state building initiatives. But the fact that we are not being received in that space in a friendly way, it makes things difficult for civil society. And my advice is to my colleagues is that we need to intensify our engagement with state actors, because we are partners in this and they have to see us as partners. In any case, we are actually making their work easy, like what Margaret had mentioned earlier, that the civil society started the civic engagement and the civic education process earlier, so it was easy for the commission. But the other thing that I would recommend is clarity, because sometimes as civil society, we have also failed to explicitly put out our objectives, and we assume a lot. Sometimes we think that everybody knows. With the passion that we have, we might not have time to explain ourselves so much. We want to rush into action. So my advice would be that we need to constantly explain ourselves in a more explicit way so that people understand that what we are doing is actually adding value to their work and also to their welfare. Yeah.
All right, thank you for your recommendation, Ms. Lona. Back to you, Ms. Jacqueline. Can you please address some of the challenges being encountered with the constitution making process, and what are your recommendations moving forward?
Thank you, Stella. I think some of the challenges are already mentioned by my colleagues in the panel. One of the things I would say is that the constitutional review process lacks political will. And I think Margaret can attest to this. The NCRC was the least funded, and most of the activities of the NCRC depended on donor funding. So when the 2013 crisis happened, the donors pulled out and the NCRC was left without money. And they could not do the public consultations and the civic education and even continue meeting in their plenary. So little political will was put on this process. The second challenge from a technical perspective, I could say that the composition of the NCRC was more political and elite driven. And I think when Lorna was mentioning about the challenges civil society face, I could see some of the debates where I witnessed people started debating from political party angle rather than looking at the constitution as a national issue. So you find that by then we had one party which was dominant, including even in the permanent membership of the commission. And that could not allow effective debates from going on. So you could see when issues of power sharing or issues of powers of the president, issues of governance structures were discussed, and then people retrieved back to their political parties. And that could not go on. And if we are moving forward now, we have known how many parties are there in this agreement. And if they are going to be part of the NCRC, as it's outlined now, where we have the different political parties in the agreement participating in this constitutional review process, and then we are likely to have a scenario where we are failing to implement the agreement because people take sides in their parties. So the constitutional process becomes very sensitive, and that's where we need to advocate for more technical expertise and a people-driven constitutional process rather than elite and political party-driven processes. The other challenge I could say is that we had a lot of amendments to the constitution process, and also with the conflict itself, the NCRC could not continue their work. For example, we had 2 or 3 amendments extending the mandate of the NCRC, and nothing moved further from that. And the last one they say is that this is the last amendment of the NCRC. And I asked myself, we still don't have even the draft, and you are saying like the mandate ends. So which means there is going to be little until we pressure for more of a citizen-driven process, and then things could move probably faster in that regard. In regards to my recommendations, I think some of them are already being said. I'll add that, for example, because we are already having this online platform, one of the previous challenges we have was how do we tap in the contribution of the diaspora? And one of the recommendations was to have an online platform where people can contribute and make submissions to the public consultation processes. So probably this is also one of the things that the Women's Intellectual Forum could take, so that women and people in diaspora can use the platform for making online submissions. The other issue is that we need to have discussions which are tailored to the thematic areas of the transitional constitution. For example, we can choose and form committees among the women intellectuals that could look at thematic area number 1, thematic area number 2, and this goes in line with looking at the thematic areas of the peace agreement, because the peace agreement and the constitution, they have some common issues. For example, if we talk of governance, security sector, the boundaries and all this. So we need to start looking at how can we as intellectuals, women, start forming committees that can look at the different thematic areas and make analysis of those that could inform us now on my next recommendation, which is, can we have a women's conference ahead of the constitutional conference so that we can look at the draft, analyze it, and make those submissions. And then when we have the opportunity and we have women coming to the conference, and then those are the things that we can be deliberating on. The other issue is that we need to have grassroots consultations. Because if we are going to be speaking for the women, we need to reach out to the women at the grassroots and do massive civic education and consult them on their views. Most of the times we tend to stop only at the national level. And I could say that probably because of lack of funding. But if we can at our own, let's try to create networks with women at the grassroots so that we can be able to probably build their capacities, and they can be able to do civic education and consultations. And then through those networks, we can be able to gather the views of the women from the grassroots and incorporate it in our submissions. I think that will legitimize our process and also legitimize whatever we are going to be submitting on behalf of the South Sudanese women. Finally, I will say that as women intellectuals, we need to have public debates to continue, be it online and when COVID permits, and then we can have it even with the academia and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jacqueline, for your wonderful recommendations. Now I'm going back to you, Ms. Margaret. Margaret, what are some of the challenges that women encounter in the process, and what are your recommendations moving forward, please?
Thank you very much once again, Stella. My colleagues have expressed and mentioned a number of challenges, and I'm going to mention the other challenges that were not mentioned. For example, insecurity. When teams are sent to the states, there are some states which are insecure, and they will travel by land and so forth. And some members, one or two, face some intimidations in some of the states. Might be for personal reasons or for other reasons, I'm not sure, but there was some intimidation that was reported in some places. Then there's lack of awareness of, especially at the grassroots, about even the process itself, the roadmap for the constitutional making process. And that's why the civic education was very important before, and as I mentioned earlier, even after the process is completed. There was this issue of lack of resources to reach out deeper in the grassroots. And I think the same issue might have been the same challenge for other processes like the national dialogue and so forth. So in this regard, I just want to say that government needs to commit in the next process, commit enough resources. Partners will come in technically and maybe with limited support, but to show the political will, the government needs to prioritize resources for this important process. And then we need a clear roadmap to be understood, not only by people at the national level, but also at the grassroots level. You might be surprised to know that maybe even some state officials are not aware about some of the issues that are in the constitution. And this is a high time, as we do build plans for civic education and plans for consultation. It's important to take this into consideration and to know that it's not that everyone knows what is in that document, and it is actually written in a legal manner. So maybe simplifying the constitution to the level of the people at the grassroots can also be a good step. There was the issue of the end of the term that was mentioned by Lona Merikaji or Jacqueline Nasiwa, which can also add as one of the challenges. Moving forward, I want to recommend the following. First, we will need to mobilize early. And this forum that we are doing right now is an example of early mobilization or early preparation for this process. And at this juncture, I also want to appreciate the efforts that are made by some partners in facilitating consultations with youth, with women, with civil society, and so forth. And these partners include UN Women, UNDP, UNMISS, and then Ideas International. Already, maybe I thought Mary Merikaji should mention some. These processes have taken place. A lot of ideas have been generated. So this is a good preparation, let me just say. Another recommendation there is that women should not shy off from forming coalitions. And this point, we got it from Honorable Martha Karua when she participated in one of the forums. She shared with us the experience of Kenya, that women were not shying off from forming coalition. There are issues of land. A coalition can be formed from there. There are issues of family law. A coalition can come out from that concern, and so forth. So I just want to, this is one of the recommendations, women should not shy off from forming coalitions. And then whether the women are in the commission or civil society or they're in the government or the executive, I mean in the legislature or any other forum, they should learn to debate their issues effectively. And if there are also repeated advocacy on issues related to gender equality and the right of the marginalized groups, we will have a successful way forward in addressing issues of concern for women. I also want to mention that documentation of previous processes is necessary. This process that is going to happen will be like the third after the independence of South Sudan. But we have documentation about the first process, about the second process. Lack of resources have stopped that from going forward. So it's a recommendation that the process that was conducted by NCRC should not be ignored. And if there are partners who are ready to help in the documentation of the issues that were raised at the grassroots level and on all levels, this one can be a good reference for the next reconstituted process. I don't want to conclude without appreciating the role that was played by the leadership of some of the commission. Late Professor Calder was very instrumental in supporting women to air their issues freely, and also some civil society actors. They've really played a great role, and they should not lose the momentum, but they should continue. We also advise that we should understand the negotiating context and be creative, more creative, when we say, in the next process. Because when we have a clear understanding of the constitutional process, of the key actors, of the major, the major interests that we have as women, we will overcome the obstacles that are there. Involvement of the youth, very important. Involvement of persons with disability, very important. In short, we should not leave anyone behind in this process. It is a process for us all, and women are found not only in one sector, women are found in many sectors. And we should expand the women's space. Actually, we should lobby for more engagement of women so that we can go even beyond the 35%. We have women in agricultural sector. Why can't they have a representative in the upcoming commission? We have women who are in trade. Why can't they have also a representative, and so forth? I just want to mention what I mentioned earlier, that Constitution is a source of life. And we have now the opportunity to strategize, opportunity to include what was not included, opportunity to shape what future we want for our country, where women's voices are not ignored. but are embraced wholeheartedly. Thank you, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Margaret, for the wonderful recommendations. Back to you, Molana Akur. Molana Akur, as a female active lawyer, can you please share with us your recommendations, especially when it comes to this sensitive issue of the family law? What would you like to recommend about it?
Okay, for me, the family law, I think when it comes to the whole discussion of the family law, I've always felt that we need to be able, I think family law is a very wide term. It can mean a lot of things. On the one end, it can be talking in terms of protection within the family from domestic violence. We can be talking about issues of marriage. We can be talking about issues of divorce. I've always felt like we should separate the issues so that we can be able to, possibly what we need are different pieces of legislation to address different issues so that we can be able to address them comprehensively. Maybe we can have separate pieces of legislation that look at purely domestic violence. We can have a separate piece of legislation that looks at marriages, for example, registration of marriage, including the registration of customary marriages, so that we're able to protect women who are who are married under customary law. But I think when it comes to a constitutional context, for me, I believe what we can do within the Constitution is actually set a framework or have provisions within the Constitution that give us a framework for having an equitable family law regime. And I believe when we look at language, in particular when it comes to language within some of these international human rights instruments such as CEDAW or Maputo, we can use some of that language and incorporate it into the Constitution to achieve just that. When we have language in the Maputo Protocol, for example, that talks about women's equality at marriage, during marriage, and at its dissolution, some of that can be used to, when you have language within a constitution, for example, that talks about the recognition of women's unpaid work, some of that can be used on later on when it comes to developing individual pieces of legislation to have, for example, a matrimonial property regime that protects community or property, or that gives women a right to be able to share within the property, including women who are not working, in recognition of the important role that women play. For example, even a woman who is not working, she does play a role when it comes to the acquisition of family property. It might not be a monetary role. So we can set language within the Constitution that will allow us to develop additional legislation that can be able to recognize that. But I believe we should begin to look at it more comprehensively, and frameworks are there that we can be able to incorporate.
All right, thank you very much, Molana Akur. Before we come to an end of this interesting discussion, I would like to thank our great panelists for taking their time to participate in this conversation. Our gratitude goes to everyone out there for tuning into this today's discussion. I would also like to thank our team members who are working behind the scene, and especially the UN Women for providing the internet for our great panelists in Juba and safe space for this discussion. We have now come to an end of our show. Wish you all well, and may God bless you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stella.
Bye, everyone.